This is episode 2 of the beat 'em up style series for Unity in 2D. Last episode we cleaned up and imported our sprites and adjusted all our sprite pivots to the foot of our characters. In this episode we're going to review the steps to ensure your characters are overlapping properly. This is critical in beat 'em up style games. 3 things you should make sure you do is number 1, set your pivots. Number 2, set your sorting layer. Number 3, set the sort axis. Number 4, set the sort point. These last 2 steps are the most important, as some other game genres don't require these settings. Make sure you like and subscribe and also hit the bell so you can see when new episodes drop. Let's jump into it. So I haven't changed anything since the last episode, and we left with all our characters in the scene, and we had sliced up the sprites, and we made sure that when we were in the sprite editor that we moved all our pivot points for these sprites to the foot of our character. And some of these changes should have taken, I think, what we ended up doing was making sure that this circular point was near the foot and center torso of our character, so directly below their belly button ideally. It looks like some of these didn't take, so let me show you what I would do. I want to make sure that this circle is around over here, and since this pivot point is set to bottom center, I want to change it to custom, and then I'm going to slide this custom pivot on the x-axis over so it's right below my character's midline. I'm going to go here and look at some of these other ones. It appears that they are okay. Make sure that I hit OK or apply and back out of that. You can do that for the rest of your characters that we're using for the rest of the series. After we've done that, the second thing that we said in our list, let's quickly review that, is we want to set our sorting layer. And we started to import a couple other sprites into our scene. We have a background image which represents the sea. Our characters are never going to go in that space, and this will travel in a different rate as our ship or where our characters are moving. And we want to make sure that this one is behind everything, so rendered first. And in order to set that, we adjust our sorting layer. And we go to our sprite renderer. For that particular object, in this case, I have a sea object, which has a sprite renderer, which is rendering the skull and bones first sprite, this one right here. And I set its sorting layer here under additional settings. I've created a list of layers, and BG for me represents the background. The higher in the list means it's going to be rendered before other elements on the list. So the C belongs to this BG or background layer. Everything else that I want to lay on top of it are going to belong to these other layers here, ultimately with objects being in front of other things like characters and enemies and level. From there, I have a sprite that's going to represent the boat. And you can see this here. This sprite renderer has its sorting layer set to level. And I'll set some colliders to represent where the characters can move around in a later episode. Then I have some more sprites which represent some of the characters or NPCs for our game. And this character here, this character that we called Buckler, belongs to the characters layer, sorting layer. This Ninja Turtle also belongs to character sorting layer. These 2 that are facing to the left, the Skelly and Shredder, belong to enemies. Now, we have our characters in the scene. We want to make sure that when our characters are moving about this scene, that they get rendered in the correct order depending on where they are in space. When my character is up here, we should imagine that this Skelly is further on back or further away from us. Let's use this sprite that I have here called Guide as a way to help us judge when things are closer to us. And so when the Skelly is higher up in the y-axis, we should be representing it as further away. And so objects that are closer to us should appear in front of this object here. So if I move my Shredder character over here, it's behaving correctly here. But in some cases, when I don't have this set correctly, then the skelly will not be rendered correctly. And how do we make sure that this happens? It was step 3 and 4 for sorting and pivots. So the two other things that we did last episode was number 3, set the sort axis, and then number 4, set the sort point. We're going to come back to number 4 in a second, but how do we change the sort axis? We want to tell Unity that our characters should be rendered based on how high they are in the y-axis, and this is not a default setting. So we need to go to File, we need to go to Edit, and go to Project Settings, make sure that we're on Graphics, then come over to Transparency Sort Mode. By default, it should be default. And what we want to do is change to a custom axis. When we select that, we can then drop into the transparency sort axis, which by default normally looks like this. It looks like 0, 0, 1. But we want to tell Unity that in this 2D game, the y-axis is the determining axis. So we swap these two values. So z is going to be 0 and y is going to be 1. So that was accomplishing step 3. We've set our sort axis. So Unity knows that if an object is higher, we're going to render them earlier than other objects that are closer to us, and thus putting them in front of other objects. And the last thing that Unity needs to know is, where do we judge when something should be in front or not? Like, if we're in a position like this, is the skelly in front of Shredder or closer to Shredder than us? Sorry, is the skelly closer to us than Shredder? How do we tell that? The last step that we need to do, based on our guide here, is to set the sort point. And this, again, is not a default setting. We need to look at each character that we're rendering, and we need to change the sprite sort point from center to pivot. Right now, the skelly is set to center, and this character is also set to center. And let's see if there's a discrepancy right here. If we move our skelly in front here, it's getting rendered correctly. If we move it back here, wait a minute, what's going on here? Our skelly is, its feet are the determining factors in the y-axis that should be setting whether the character is closer to us or further on back in the scene. Right? We were using this judge here. So if the skelly is, their feet is right here, they should be rendered behind Shredder. So what is the thing that we need to change? Right now, Unity is set to sprite sort point as the center of our sprites. And so inherently, these sprites have a center of mass, so to speak, and it would be closer to Shredder's middle section right here. And for the skelly, it would be somewhere right here. And so if we move, if we move the skelly a little bit closer to here, we might see it flip. And this is when their center points are crossing higher than the other. And we don't want that. We don't want that. So the thing that we want to change here, and which is crucial, and we're now going to be setting number 4, is changing our sprite sort point from center to pivot. And we need to do this for all of our characters. So I just changed it for Skelly, and we're going to do this for Shredder. And you'll now notice the behavior change to what we want. Unity is going to say, oh, we need to look at their y-axis values, and the point that we examine their y-axis values is at this circle or pivot point that we set. So now we can see if my Skelly is moving over here, it's behind Shredder. Whereas before, we had this ambiguity and it wasn't rendered correctly. But now that we've set this to sprite sort point down to the pivot, and we've set our pivots at their feet, this is where we can tell whether they're in front of them or not. So as I slowly slide down, we should see as the pivot points cross, so should their rendering. And this is the meat and potatoes of sorting or rendering the sorting the rendering correctly. So if our characters seem to walk like this is what we're looking for. And then when they cross, then they're going to get rendered behind, because we can see by their feet that the Skelly is higher or further away from us. And when they're further away from us, we should be able to see objects that are closer to us in front of it. I hope this helps. Next episode is going to be player movement. Make sure that you come back to this video every now and then, because there are these 4 crucial steps. And if you're not familiar with beat 'em up style, it's not going to look correct unless you have these 4 settings down. Make sure you like and subscribe and hit that bell so you can see more episodes. I'll see you guys later. Thanks.